I will hit start webinar when.
What's that?
Okay, it looks like we're starting. Never mind.
Okay.
Right, good evening, coaches. Welcome back for our third and final talk of the performance series. Tonight we've got Don Moxley with us. So I'm going to hand over to Tracy and Don, and we'll see you at the end again.
Okay, guys, thanks very much for joining us again. Another very interesting talk tonight from Don Moxley. Don and I have a shared interest, I suppose. I heard a podcast of Don's in flow research, a podcast on a particular topic that I'm interested at the moment in flow research. And Don did a very interesting presentation or podcast that got our attention, and we sort of connected about a month or two ago. And I'm very excited for this presentation. I think, again, it's just something that we haven't really listened to or heard about before. It's just new ideas, new thinking. And I hope you enjoy it. And let's get stuck in, Don.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm excited to be virtually in South Africa with you all today. I've never visited there, but I'm looking forward to getting there in person sometime. Again, thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm trained as an exercise physiologist. I did my graduate work at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, back in the early 80s. And since then, I've worked in the field pretty much straight through. I've spent about 25 of the last 35 years as either an adjunct or an assistant professor teaching the exercise sciences. But I've always kept a foot either in the industry as it relates to wearable technology or in the high performance community. So I've had a great little three-pronged approach to my career that's given me an opportunity to learn and experiment and discover some things. And we'll talk about some of those things today. The biggest part of the story today is going to come from my experience. I wrestled. I'm a wrestler. That was my background. I wrestled at Ohio State. And in 2015, the coach of the program came to me and said they were struggling, and I'll tell that story today. So most of the story is using data and experience that came from the work with that team from 2015 through 2018. I think you'll find it applicable. I realize wrestling and swimming are different sports, but they are very similar in the fact they're very individual sports. They can have a tendency to be very anaerobic, with the exception of some of the longer distance sports in the pool. But when we start talking about readiness, I see a lot of consistency between preparing a swimmer and preparing a wrestler for competition. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my presentation screen. And do we have it up? Do we see it, Tracy? Can you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah, no, we're all good.
Okay, so I call this program "Why Your Program Doesn't Fit Your Athletes," and this is really important because I think as coaches, we're asked to go lead a program, we're asked to go lead a process, and we put together our book of workouts, and that's what we call our program. And a lot of times, sometimes athletes do not fit well into our program. And I want to talk about that and how you can use technology to find your problem children and start to work your way through this. Ultimately, in this process of coaching, we're trying to do two things: trying to increase the probability of success, and we're trying to decrease the probability of failure, both in teams and in individuals. And that's what I think about when I start designing training programs. But before we can get the right answers, we have to take a step back and ask the right questions. And I hope at the conclusion of this that you'll take a look at your program and think to yourself, okay, am I asking the right questions, or am I just looking for answers to reaffirm what I've already believed? And I think that can be a challenging position to be in. We'll talk about a model for long-term athlete development. We'll identify processes and technologies for tracking. We'll present the model for why you will have maladaptation in your program, and we'll present our model for identifying what we call key performance indicators. Now, before we start, we're going to be talking about what's called heart rate variability. And I don't know if I was trying to look at if we can tell how many people are online, or if we can do a hand show, how many people have worked with or seen HRV. But what HRV is heart rate is the number of beats per second. So if my heart beats 60 times in a minute, I have a heart rate of 60 beats per minute. Heart rate variability is a measurement of the time between those beats. And this isn't important. It's a science that came out of the Russian space program in the late 60s. It has evolved dramatically. The Finns have done a great job of taking this technology and building it into wearable technology. That was my first awareness of it, working with some of the polar heart rate monitor products. But we're looking, and when you think about it, we're going to think about that. We think about a heart rate of 60 beats per minute. That means our heart's beating once a second, beep, 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 beep. We think of that consistency, but with high variability, and this is it doesn't sound like it, but I'm just trying to express it. Instead of being beep, 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 it's beep, 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 beep. So there's a high level of variability. Is what we're looking for. Now, when we're looking at this, what we're looking at is we're trying to get a measurement, or we're starting to take a measurement of what's called the autonomic nervous system, or the automatic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that you don't think about, that runs automatically. It typically drives organ performance. And when we think of the autonomic nervous system, we're going to think about it in two sides of the nervous system. The one side is what we call fight or flight. We call that the sympathetic side of the nervous system. And then we have what we call parasympathetic. And as we go through, I'm going to use those terms. When I'm saying sympathetic, I want you to imagine a bear walking through the door of the room that you're in, you recognizing that, the fear in your body going into a process to protect you or give you the resources that you need to escape the bear or the lion or whatever the animal is. And then parasympathetic is we call this rest and digest. Once you have escaped the bear or the lion or whatever, and you found a safe place, you sit down and you start to relax. This is the recovery phase. And we're going to use this throughout the rest of the presentation. Now, as coaches, we build boxes of sympathetic stress. We build workouts that a workout has an intensity, it has a duration. We have a mode that goes, whether it's cardiovascular, strength, or skill, or whatever we're doing. And then we build schedules throughout the week that will have different variations to these sympathetic stresses that we create. When we build a box of stress, this gray line represents homeostasis, meaning the body's not changing. But when we put this box of stress on the individual, we don't get stronger. We actually get weaker. And with this weakness, we trigger processes. With recovery, we super compensate, get stronger. We add another box of stress, rinse and repeat. We keep moving through the process. But our challenge is a lot of times that we create this workout, we get the natural decline, but we don't have the recovery. We have a clouded recovery phase. We'll talk more about what would cloud this. We add another box of stress, and instead of super compensating, we move towards injury. We move towards something breaking. And so I want to talk about how this has worked with us, and starting in the 2015 season. So at Ohio State at the time, we had 4 wrestlers, and this isn't a lineup of 10 wrestlers. So our starting lineup has 10 wrestlers. The wrestler that you see there on the left, his name is Logan Stieber. Logan had won 3 national titles, coming back to win his 4th. And to put that in perspective, there's only been 4 wrestlers in the history of USA collegiate wrestling to have won 4 national titles. And then the three athletes next to him, Kyle Snyder, Nathan Tomasello, and Bo Jordan, those three wrestlers had gone on to win four-time All-Americans. Kyle Snyder, the second wrestler there, has gone on to win an Olympic gold, an Olympic silver, multiple world titles. So, and the three to the right, Kyle, Nathan, and Bo were all freshmen. So we have this team coming together in 2015 where Ohio State had never won a national title. And we've got a lot of firepower in the lineup that we can make a run at this title. But one of the challenges to win a national title in wrestling, you usually have to score about 85 points. And so with a national champion wrestling his way through the bracket, when they'll score between 20 and 25 points. And now this year we had two national championships, a runner-up and a third placer. So we didn't quite have enough points, probably wouldn't have enough points to win that title. So in the lineup, we had a fifth wrestler. His name was Kenny Courts. And Kenny was a very talented wrestler. He wrestled in the state of Pennsylvania, which is a very difficult place to wrestle. This kid was very talented, and it was his junior year. He was not performing the way he should. Everyone recognized this. The coach had taken him through all of the diagnostic work you can do with in the medical center there at Ohio State. And finally he brought him to me, and I live just outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have a lab in my house where I can do some testing, and he brought him over and said, what do you know? So the first thing I did was I was going to do a stress test, a max stress test, just to see his status. But one of the first things I do when I do that is I measure heart rate variability. I measure what is this athlete's readiness to do the work we're getting ready to do. And at the time I was using this thing called a Zephyr bioharness that gave me both HR, HRV, and it actually gives me respiration too. It was one of my favorite tools to work with. And when we started to do the measurement this morning, he had a resting HRV of about 10 milliseconds. Now, to put that in perspective, when the bear walked through the door of your room, your HRV would drop to 10 milliseconds. And so he's with me on a Sunday morning. It's about 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, having wrestled a match Friday night. So he's got a long time to recover, and he's still walking in at 10 milliseconds. And at the time, I had him lay down in the facility. His HRV climbed to about 100 milliseconds. And then as soon as he stood back up, it dropped right back down to 10 milliseconds. So this is just a quick little test. So the act of standing up, his body recognized as a full stress event. And this is starting to give me an indication that this athlete, at the time, I used a term called overtraining syndrome. And if you were looking at overtraining syndrome, he was probably pretty close to stage 4. So that was the first thing we saw that morning. I then took him and I use it's called a Velotron. It's a bike ergometer. This is a copper fin that I can send a magnetic resistance through. So it's a very accurate way to measure workload. And when we started to do the training session with him, what you see up here, this takeoff at about 210 watts. Now, practically this athlete should have peaked at about 300 watts based on his size, conditioning, where it should be. But he was basically at about 210 watts, really took off, got into trouble, and failed at about 230 watts. So as long as workload was relatively low, everything was stable. As we moved up, it started to get problematic. So I've got an athlete that's sitting here in front of me, probably stage 4 overtraining syndrome, not able to do the workload, showing all the symptoms. And I said to the coach, I said, listen, if you continue to train this athlete the way you train him, he's not going to be successful. He's going to break, and you have to start training him based on what he's able to do. So there's a period of time we had to get some hardware in place and get some agreements done between the university and myself. But what we basically did was I threw training caps on him. I said, I do not want your heart rate to exceed 168 beats per minute. We were using the Omega Wave HRV tool, which was a solid tool. We really enjoyed working with it. But just by adding training caps, we started to see an increase in HRV here, which was really beneficial. Saw this great little pop out here on the 28th. Now, I let him go full practice this day. We saw the impact of that moving down because that extended for almost 2 more days. We got him back, but the long and short of the story was we got him into Big Tens here. And the significance of the Big Ten championships is you have to place in Big Tens to qualify for the national tournament. And the Big Ten tournament in collegiate wrestling in the United States is pretty close to 12 of the top 15 teams in the country wrestle in the Big Ten. So it can be a very difficult tournament to qualify out of. But we got him through it. He finished 8th in the Big Ten, is what we needed to get him into nationals. And then we start to take a look at what happened between Big Tens and nationals. So we were working with training caps, but at this point in time, I started to use some prescriptive training to start to take a look at if we can break this sympathetic signal that's driving his recovery. And so what we did was I put him on that Velotron at a fixed workload. So I believe the wattage was 140 watts. This is where we calculated his anaerobic threshold to be. This was the first workout that we did. This is a 2x15 interval workout that we did with 5 minutes recovery. Now, this is the next day, same workout next day, exact same workload. And what we saw was almost an 11% improvement in heart rate at the exact same workload. The third day, we saw about another 3% improvement. And then by the fourth day, we saw a nice little bump here. And so we see almost a 15% improvement in his heart rate at the given workload. The workloads were all the same, but consistently, we also saw this great little rise in HRV. And when I saw this told me, okay, his body is starting to recognize he's not under stress. He can recover. They'll give you resources back. The long and short of the story is we sent him to nationals and we did very well. Kenny made All-American. He finished 5th in the country, which was really important. And sending him into nationals with this HRV a little over 100 was a really big deal. We didn't realize how big it was at the time, but the team won a national title, and all of a sudden people were starting to ask me, okay, what are we doing? And my voodoo started to become recognized. So when I think of preparing an athlete, I think of 3 phases. I think of physiological, psychological, and the skills. And I go over this because I think it's important, because when I talk to athletes, I talk about the fact that of these 10 subcategories here, I tell them you'll win on your strength. Which one of these, which other one of these is your strength is what you're going to win with, but you're going to lose on the weakness here. And you have to develop all these elements in order to be successful long-term. You can't have a 0 in any of these areas. And then when we take a look at it, we start to deal with the fact that we have a lot of different kinds of athletes that come to us, and there's a lot of variability that comes with this. So the next set of slides is talking about, okay, what are all the different variabilities we have to think about when our athletes walk into our room? And in this case, I'm looking at runners here, and this would apply to any sport. But when we look at Usain Bolt, and the reason I used Usain Bolt is we know his fiber typing. Someone did the work and we saw it. He's a 40% type 1 sprinter fiber. And when we look at another track athlete, this is Wilson Kipsang, who at the time was a world record holder. I don't have the fiber typing on the current world record holders, but Wilson was a 90% type 1, so a very high level cardiovascular athlete. Now, the reason I say this is that it's important to note that I think of wrestlers living down in this area of the spectrum. If we look at this continuum, I think of wrestlers being down here, hockey players, wrestlers, athletes, baseball players. I think of field sport. You can think of runners, triathletes, cross-country skiers. I think of field sport athletes, football, lacrosse. I don't think you may not have lacrosse in South Africa. I don't know. But then the middle of this being court sport athletes. The reason I make the point of this is that if wrestlers in this fourth group down here, we had an All-American that wrestled at Ohio State in 2008, who, again, he was an All-American, so he was one of the 8 best in the country. But the day before he started practice for his senior year, he ran the Columbus Marathon in 3 hours flat. And that to me was remarkable, that an athlete whose sport lives in this 4th percentile from a muscle fiber typing group is actually living up here in an area. I mean, you know, a 3-hour marathon is up in this period. So we have a lot of variability in the physiology of the athletes that show up to our practice. And then if we go out a little bit more, what we see is that not only do we have the physiological continuum, we have a force continuum where we're looking at force, skills, and speed. We have energy system continuums. You know, you can have athletes come in, you can have one athlete come in very fit, you can have the same athlete, a different athlete come in very unfit. And unfortunately, this is going to be, your program won't fit all of those athletes. You know, a program won't fit training Usain Bolt and Wilson Kipsang. And then we throw in the 4th continuum, and I'm putting both sympathetic and parasympathetic together here, that you're going to have these athletes coming in that are going to have different recovery modes. I'll talk a little bit more about trauma later on, but I can have athletes that are similar in all the others, but if one has been traumatized and the other one hasn't, there's going to be a change in the way they recover. And I think this is really important to keep in mind as we work our way through the process. So in 2015-16, I started working with the team more directly. We started collecting a lot more data. And in particular, we started collecting what we call nighttime HRV. So part of the HRV measurement is what's called the root mean square. And this is a measurement of vagal tone. Your vagus nerve is the nerve that feeds most of your organs. And the higher the vagal tone, the more ready, the higher the recovery is. So in 2016, what we saw was this 129 measurement was from my Olympic gold medalist. This 110 was from another Olympic medalist. This 98 was from an NCAA national champion. This 95 I throw in, this was from a CrossFit age group national champion. This 92 was for someone who finished 3rd in the country. The 45 down here was, this was an athlete that should have been an All-American as a freshman that didn't make it. And then the 15, you know, I work with this 15, I put it in here because we had a wrestler on the team at one point in time was the most talented person I ever saw in my life, just absolutely incredibly talented. But, and in one match against, you take him against anybody on the face of the earth. If he's in a tournament and he gets into his second match, you can pretty much bet the field against him. And if he gets into the 3rd match, anybody in the stands can probably beat him. He just has no ability to recover between events. And that's what this low HRV measurement looks like. This is someone who has high amounts of readiness. This is someone who has low amounts of readiness. So we're starting to get a picture of, okay, All-Americans, national champions high, talented guys that fade out relatively low. We're going to start to look at this and learn some more. So this is when we started our sports science program. And when I think of sports science, it's a process that return objective results that coaches and athletes can use to make decisions that enhance personal health and performance. So ultimately, we need these athletes making decisions, making good decisions. And we need behaviors, and behaviors typically drive the culture of the team. The culture of the team drives the decisions that they make. The decisions that they make typically drive behavior. So if there's a break here anywhere, the question is, how do you correct it? Well, I think you correct it with data and knowledge. You teach this, and this is going to influence the decision. The decisions will lead to behaviors, and the groups of behaviors will eventually become culture. And I think this is an important paradigm that we put together at the time. So we're using HRV to help make good decisions. This is an assessment. This is a 24-hour HRV assessment, and we're using a piece of technology that's called First Beat. And the thing that I want you to notice here is that the red is sympathetic, green is parasympathetic, so stress, rest, and digest. And this is a typical 8-hour night. So this is a lot. This is sleeping in a good environment, good long period of time. Now, if we take that same athlete and we let them drink 4 beers before they go to bed, this is what their assessment starts to look like, that they're carrying the sympathetic load into their sleep, and their recovery basically represents about 4 hours. So the 8 hours of sleep is only yielding 4 hours of benefit. And it's this kind of knowledge and data that we put into the program to give the athletes the ability to say, you know what, I can probably get through practice if I drink the beers, if I go out, but there's going to be a price you pay. There's going to be a consequence. And ultimately, you want to be able to give them good data to make that decision more effectively. So we move up another year, 2016-17, because of a relationship we developed with a group of elite warrior trainers. In the United States, we have a thing called the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is the largest Air Force base on the earth. And there, the Air Force Special Operations Group run human performance programs. And they had come to Ohio State because they were working on trying to get warrior tracking in line, and they were using our athletes as an analog for that. And so we started to develop, they helped us develop what we call key performance indicators for the sport. And the way we did this was we looked at the 4 big areas that we looked at with the wrestlers were body composition, because, you know, we're a weight cutting sport, and if you don't cut weight correctly, it's problematic. Cardiovascular strength, and then absolute readiness. And when we looked at the things that we measured to measure body comp, we did DEXA scans, we did skin folds, we weighed them in, we tracked weight daily. For cardiovascular and strength, we looked at 3K times, we measured VO2, 3K running times. We did regular strength measurements, bench press divided by weight, deadlift divided by weight, power measurements using vertical jump off of force platforms. We also did the simple stuff, pull-ups. We had an athlete hold a plank for 21 minutes. We did grip strength, where they would hold half their body weight in their right in each hand to see it, so a weighted hold. And then finally, we looked at readiness. We used a couple different parameters there, but primarily we did that through the Omega Wave platform. And then what we did, we said, well, okay, we want to figure out what makes a difference here. And so we broke the group into 4 groups. So I had about 39 wrestlers in my room. We had 9 of them who had achieved All-American status or better. So these are Olympians, national champions, All-Americans. Group 2 were athletes that were redshirted, that had they been in the lineup, we expected them to be All-Americans. We had to make a decision. What do we do with this group of athletes that's not actually getting tested? So we decided to move them into their own group. Group 3 were athletes that were starters, but they've worn the uniform, but they'd never achieved All-American status. And then we had a group 4 were athletes that had never started for us. Now, these athletes all train together every day. They wrestle together, they train together, everything is the same. The only difference was in the results that started to work out here. So what we did was we took all of that data for the key performance indicators and we put it in to say, what is significant? And for us, you know, I think a lot of times people will think that wrestling is an anaerobic sport. But the most powerful predictor of success, when we look at 1s versus 2-3s, 1-2s, and so on, cardiovascular fitness was the #1 predictor of an athlete's ability to move from group 4 to group 1. When we go down and look at strength, where you know, so many times it gets embedded in the culture, your ability to deadlift a max weight or deadlift a percentage of your body weight. Once you could lift 2.25 times, deadlift 2.25 times your body weight, getting stronger made no difference. Bench press selected nothing. Muscular endurance for us was a good selector. And that plank, the plank was a good selector for being able to figure out, you know, the All-Americans from the other runs. So I think this was an important part, and from a coaching standpoint, you know, I had a head coach that just loved the traditional strength stuff. He wanted to put a bench press award up on the wall. And I said, not while I'm here, because, you know, Frank, listen, I don't have anything against a bench press. I have something against celebrating it as a measurement of success, because it predicts nothing. I want to celebrate the things that select for us. And this was a really important part from the performance standpoint. From an HRV standpoint, what we start to see, this Vegas score, what we saw was there was a distinct cut line when we looked at the Vegas score of our athlete versus the quality of their opponent. And what we saw was there was a distinct cut line that the higher the Vegas score, the higher the HRV, the higher the likelihood they'd win. In fact, when you graph this this way, so we're looking at the match different in points OSU versus points to the opponent, and we look at the parasympathetic score, you know, this graph was dumbfounding when we saw it. It was just, if you want an athlete to perform better, you need to have an athlete that is ready, that has a high parasympathetic recovery. So as we move through this, and then finally for selection, so in the 2018 season, we qualified the entire starting lineup for the national tournament. This was the first time we did this in school history. We had 8 All-Americans. This is the most we ever had in school history. And when you looked at their RMSD scores, what you see is that the 2 athletes that did not make All-American, it got to the point, if you don't have a 75 millisecond RMSSD, you won't make All-American. We had 2 athletes that didn't, and 2 athletes didn't make All-American. And this is something you can start to think about in selection, you know, to make the starting lineup in a wrestling team, you have to win a wrestle-off. So you have to beat your opponent in the room. And it's usually only have to beat them 1 time. Maybe you do 2 days in a row or something like that, best 2 out of 3. But they don't have to wrestle multiple times in a day. And this might be something to consider. And the other thing too is that if you've got someone with an incredibly low HRV score and someone with a high HRV score that are close from a talent standpoint, you know, it may not be a bad idea to make that part of selection, because it's going to determine whether someone can actually achieve the goal that we put for the team. So go back and review. You know, we're thinking about homeostasis. We put a workout in, the athlete gets weaker. With recovery, we get super compensation. And again, we repeat that. So we're thinking about this sympathetic, parasympathetic process. So when I am parasympathetic, when I have high HRV, I have high adaptability. I have resources that I can put towards development. When I have low HRV, I'm in survival. I'm just trying to stay alive. I'm not getting better. And this is an important, I think this is a good way to think about, you know, and there are times when we would take our teams to survival levels with long recoveries afterwards. There's times when we put in training blocks that we would really drive HRV down intentionally. And then you put in recovery blocks to bring it back up. So that low HRV is not the problem. Consistently low HRV in the absence of recovery, there is the problem. Okay. So you can have a lot of things that contribute to this intentional recovery. The one I can't emphasize enough is sleep. The 3 things that really drive recovery: sleep, nutrition, mindfulness. The thing that's the biggest threat to HRV is competition. Developing skills is relatively low. Cardio is relatively low. Building strength is relatively high. So one of the first things we did with our athletes is start to work on sleep hygiene. I think from a coaching standpoint, I think if you're going to become expert in anything, this is a good place to become expert in. In the absence of bad sleep, you can't fix things. You have to have sleep to fix it. You have to be prepared to coach sleep. When we look at that, paying attention to light is one of the single most important things you pay attention to. I don't know what you deal with your devices in the culture that you're in, but simply crappy light is going to throw off the circadian rhythm and is going to throw the whole process out of play. Go to bed and wake up same time every day. Again, it's this rhythm that we get into that is so important. And then expose yourself. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And then expose yourself to sunlight early in the morning and throughout the day. This is driving that circadian process. So these are all important parts of being able to get that sleep recovery. When you think of psychological stress, a lot of it comes from thinking of regrets of the past versus fears of the future. That's where the stress comes from. But when someone is present, you're not dealing with that. And I have a good friend, he was actually a teammate. He said, you can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. So this fear process that we're working with our athletes on can be a real challenge, and it can be a thing to think about. I've seen too many practices where it may be a tough practice for the team or the athlete, and at the conclusion of practice, the coach throws out some threatening kind of thought. You know, we've either got to do better, or we're not going to do this, or there's going to be a sense of doom that goes with his or her comments. You know, all you're doing is extending the sympathetic event at that point. You're not driving parasympathetic. And I think from a coaching standpoint, when you finish delivering your box of stress, you know, the objective is to get into parasympathetic response as soon as possible. An expression of love, an expression of acceptance, an expression of team and safety is a good way to kickstart that process. Meditation and meditative tools became very important to us at the time. I'll talk a little bit about RSA or breath work. We were teaching it. We taught it in the warm-up. We then reinforced it with the cool down at the end of practice. We taught what we call RSA breathing. I think my next slide talks about this. With some of the athletes, we went into teaching meditation and using biofeedback tools. We use a tool out of Southern California that's called Heart Math and their inner balance tool, and it was a very successful tool for us. With breath work, RSA stands for respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it's simply breathing in a process of 6 breaths a minute, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. A lot of research shows this. This is one of the most effective tools for increasing parasympathetic effect, and it's a skill that's available to all athletes at all times. And like I said, when we started the warm-up, this was part of our regular warm-up. When we started our warm-up, we actually put a clock with a sweep second hand on it so we could do 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and taught the athletes to breathe. And this was in the process of their warm-up. It was exciting for me that when I saw athletes that were in the grinds, one of my All-Americans did a really good job of this. I would see him go out of bounds, and then as he got ready to come back in, he would start a physical process of recovery, but he would start to throw in a couple quick RSA breaths in between the time they stopped wrestling to where they came back inbounds to start wrestling. So he was gaining recovery in the middle of the match. And that's just a skill that you have to teach over time. And when they get it, it's really exciting to see. Oops. Okay. So in conclusion, this went a little faster than what I thought it was going to be. That's what happens when you get excited when you talk. In conclusion, the thing I want to go back and reinforce is that recovery training is easy, frankly. You know, anyone can go to the whip, but being able to focus on recovery and see these elements is where the coaching skill really comes into play and gives you the ability to really make a difference in the way these athletes. And again, with what we're doing, I have, as a coach, it's more than just dishing sympathetic. It's about understanding the parasympathetic, and at the same time, giving these athletes, giving these kids that you're working with the zone, the area, the ability to recover, and this changes dramatically. I showed that graph of our 2018 season, and frankly, one of those wrestlers came from a very, very tough household. And I don't know, we did a lot of sensory deprivation float tank work. We floated that team 140 times that season. Float tanks move the needle. I couldn't get this kid into a tank. I was able to get him to do some meditation. I was able to do him a little bit of biofeedback work, but I couldn't get him to do the hard work. And ultimately they have to do it. I can't stuff him in the tank. So this is one of the challenges that we get into, and trauma can be difficult to deal with, but unless you realize it and recognize what's going on, it's always going to be a problem. Do we have questions, Tracy?
I don't see any in the chats at the moment, but I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So yesterday evening's talk was by Dr. John Rudd. He's a doctor of psychology, and his talk was on post-pandemic trends with adolescents in sport.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, post-pandemic, have you seen a significant change in heart rate variabilities from pre-pandemic stuff?
So to answer that question, frankly, I don't have access to that data right now.
Okay.
I don't now. In conversations with the people that do have direct access to that data, we don't see that.
Okay.
The training load for the athletes that we've worked with has remained largely the same. So the question is, with the isolation, would there be a traumatic effect? I think there certainly could be, but I don't think there's anything there that can't be recovered from. Again, this is, if I were going back to grad school right now, I'd be going back to grad school not in physiology but in psychology. You can't get athletes to do something different unless you get them to think about how they do it differently. And those are psychological tools, and understanding the psychology of trauma. The more we learn about this, the more I see it as, okay, this is a big issue to deal with. I go back to, and I don't know how much you guys hear about the stuff that happens in the States, but when I was wrestling at Ohio State back in the early 80s, we had some just amazing athletes come into our program that would just disappear. People so much more talented than I. It was ridiculous. Well, in retrospect, what we've come to find out, that one of the doctors that we had on staff was molesting athletes. Now, so you have a 17, 18-year-old kid come into a program, leave home for the first time, but put into a very intense training center, and then you throw in the fact that he might be being molested, having come from a home that may be traumatic to begin with, right? So we have, I guess as I think through this, we do really good at creating trauma in and of itself, with idiot parents and idiot coaches and just, ego. And so while the pandemic is certainly another level of stress, we've got a lot of other things that we need to worry about besides isolation.
Okay. So I've got a question here for you. I've got a few. So William asks, what is the relationship between heart rates and heart rate variability?
So heart rate is the number of beats it takes to deliver oxygen to the cells based on the work that's being done. With my heart, if I'm sitting at rest, my heart rate drops because there's a low demand for oxygen in the cells. There's a low demand of clearance to byproducts. As workload picks up, I have to deliver more oxygen, heart rate picks up, and so on. Heart rate variability relates to the stress status. So I can have high HRV and moderately high heart rate. Once my heart rate gets very high, once I go up into zone 4, zone 5 of a 5-zone system, the body's saying, hey, this is a big deal. And I equate it to, again, hunter-gatherers. You know, you're out walking around the savannah and a lion shows up and thinks you're lunch. So we go zone 5, and hopefully the lion doesn't have a good deep gas tank and we're able to get away. Maybe some zone 4 work, but we have a boatload of cortisol produced. You know, part of this, part of that stress response is cortisol. That cortisol is going to drive down HRV, because what it's doing is it's saying, give me resources to escape. And so HRV has more to do with recovery, where HR has to do with workload.
Okay. William, that answer your question? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, so next one. What are your thoughts on adjusting the daily training program based on the nightly HRV data?
I'll tell you, I don't adjust daily. As I work with coaches, and again, whether they're cardiovascular sports like cycling or triathlon, or they're hyper sports like wrestling or explosive sports, there is a program that's necessary for you to achieve your goals. That's what a coach knows. A coach knows, in order to get to this point, this is the program we need to do. I look at HRV. Am I reacting to my program appropriately? So I don't make daily changes. What I do make, I look at it when HRV starts to trend down, or I'm not getting the recovery, then I'll modify workouts. I don't do it daily. I think that's too aggressive, but I certainly want to look at it over time. So I think that answers that question. I don't do it daily, and I'm looking at your questions too here at the same time. Yeah, I don't do it nightly. Now, you know what? If I wake up and I have a bad night's sleep and there's a lot bad going on, I don't change my workout. What I do is I go back and I change my recovery. We were able to completely invest in recovery and didn't have to change. In fact, I went to my coach a couple of times. I said, listen, we've got some bandwidth here. If you want to go harder, you can. And the coach said, no, we're doing what we need to do. One of the other things, and I think you'll appreciate this. So in the NCAA wrestling, you start in October and November. October, November, I call it weight cutting season. You're starting to get down to weight. We get to December. We might have a couple simple competitions late November, early December. But in January, we start the Big Ten season. So January and February is the high competitive season, with the Big Ten championships coming the end of February and the national championships the first week of March. So we would get through December, and then there was a break for Christmas and New Year's, and we'd send the athletes home for a little bit. And we came back and we thought, let's, these kids are coming back. They've had 5 days off or 6 days off, man, we can go really deep, because this was the last chance to do a big, deep training block. Well, they came back the first day and I did HRVs, and I got the lowest measurements of the entire season the day they came back from vacation. And what we learned from that is family stress is greater than sports stress. And so we literally had to pull back. We made a decision right there. I said, okay, we're not going full gas this first workout. We're going to go easy. We're going to get some HRV back. We're going to get some recovery back. Then we'll go full gas the last 3 or 4 days. Instead of getting 6 days, I only got 3 or 4. But we recognized that stress from family and travel and a different bed and all these things was significant. So that was one of the real interesting overnight measurements we saw. If I have a bad morning measurement and I can explain it, here's what's going on. Listen, there were 2 occasions when we travel. We have 10 wrestlers that compete. We're allowed to travel with 16 because you have guys to work out with and something. So on 2 occasions, I recommended 2 different wrestlers travel because we saw a drop in HRV the day before we left. And we predicted the fact that athlete was going to have flu symptoms within 24 hours. And they wrestled the first match. They had flu by the end of that, and the other wrestler had to come back in because he was fully symptomatic for the flu. This was before COVID. And I don't think there'd be any doubt and in fact, we see that with HRV data with COVID. We see a drop with the infection and the spread of the virus. So it actually affects it. I see the question, is there a genetic impact on HRV and therefore the need to determine baseline values? It's not genetic, it's traumatic. It's the portfolio of trauma that athlete comes to you with. Again, I can have an athlete come from a good, loving household that does not fear performance, does not regret, has a high, they're present, they do a lot of things good. I can have another wrestler that we recorded side by side that came from a household where there was way too much pressure, perhaps whether it's poverty or sexual trauma or something going on. Listen, we can't forget the fact that right now the data in the States say that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 boys will experience some type of a sexual trauma by the time they're 18. 1 in 5 women have to deal with rape or attempted rape by the time they're 25. We can do stress really well. We're doing it in society. We have paper tigers, whether you're worrying about your loan payment or your job or things like that. Stress is easy to do. The question is, do we have built-in recovery processes to take advantage of this environmental stress that's around us all? This is really important. And someone who has dealt with trauma in the past will be hypervigilant. Someone who's born into a rattlesnake pit has to be hypervigilant to survive. There's a change in the mechanics of their brain. I don't care if they moved out of the rattlesnake pit and starts living with bunny rabbits. There still will be hypervigilance, and you have to deal with that. So it's not genetic. It's coming from a trauma portfolio. HRV, heart rate data in teenagers, Omicron virus. I have a swimmer under the care of a cardio surgeon, problems picked up after cardio incident in training. Double vax, but tested positive the day after an incident, -1. Do we need to adjust our training? Yes. You should. Listen, there are great tools. I'm going to use our United States reference. So there's a really good product in the United States that we use. It's called an Aura ring. This is a ring. I don't know if you guys see this. It's about a $300 product. It is a very good HRV measurement. There's another company that's called BioStrap. It's a wrist-worn strap that's very good. There's a lot. Listen, and if you want to start to experiment, if you have a polar heart rate monitor, there's a group called Elite HRV. This is an HRV company that runs on your phone. It's a free app that you can use to do HRV with. This is a variable that you will find beneficial, and it should be the variable that you're using is this athlete adapting to my program, or is this athlete maladapting to my program? Because it's going to be one of the two. Do we need to adjust training? Well, you adjust training based on that long-term response of HRV. That's the tool that you're looking for. HRV, we can use it to predict overtraining. We can use it to predict and select athletes. We can use it to measure progress against our training loads. It is a very, very valuable marker.
So you mentioned something earlier about travel. So if I move into sort of a traveling athlete's status, maybe a state swimmer or a national swimmer, and they are traveling, HRV obviously, like you said, travel is affecting these athletes. So going to another country for a competition and arriving there is going to affect HRV. Is there a general sort of recovery period that would be necessary?
It's individual.
Okay.
Again, going back to that trauma portfolio that athlete brings to them. The athlete that is traumatized will have a longer recovery period. The athlete that hasn't can be relatively short.
So at a high performance level, you would actually have to have that tested and send athletes earlier, some athletes later.
Or you engage in recovery tools when you get there. This is where you can proactively, the same way I proactively train, I put in a stress to drive sympathetic. I can proactively put in a program to drive parasympathetic. Simple things when you travel with your own pillow. Listen, everything to get sleep right is critical. Okay. I travel for work, and I pay a close attention to my HRV. And when I'm coming off a long travel, my HRV is horrible. And one of the things my wife and I learned is I learned to stay in a certain brand of hotel where I knew their beds were always exactly the same. And my wife bought the same bedding and pillows for our bed. So literally going from my bed to this bed, there was very little differentiation with this. And listen, that can come with a pillow. The room temperature gets set the same time every time. The room temperature in the hotel is the same as my room temperature at home. So creating that consistency to be able to drive sleep. Then listen, there's things that you can put on top of that to make sure that your sleep is optimized, whether it's make sure you're supplementing with magnesium. Is there a need for melatonin? I'm not totally bought into that, but if it works for some people, that's great. Driving meditative processes or biofeedback systems. These can all be good tools to boost the parasympathetic against the sympathetic drive that came with the cost of the travel.
Okay. All right, great. And then just one last thing. With reference to flow states and flow psychology, does your interest in flow state come from your position on assisting recovery?
Well, so flow for me has been as an athlete, I struggled psychologically my third year. And I hooked up with a great sports psychologist who introduced me to flow. And I consider Flow, the Psychology of Optimum Experience, the most important book I ever read. It's something I put in. Now, when we start to take a look at diagnosing or producing the flow state, Stephen Kotler, our mutual friend, and we've had a lot of conversations. I personally believe a flow state is a co-activated sympathetic parasympathetic state. It's not one or the other. They're both on at the same time. And this is what's going to, and so if you think about this as an athlete, when you get into flow, when you've been able to, it's absolute presence. Okay. I've been able to push away all the external boundaries or external influence. I'm focused on the task at hand. I've lost a sense of self. I've lost the sense of time. This sympathetic is easy. When I go to the national championships, when I go to a big event, I'm going to have sympathetic drive. The question is, what do I do to get the parasympathetic drive? And parasympathetic is going to come from the mindfulness. It's going to come from the focusing. It's going to come from all these other tools. And it's those practices. This is the way it was for me. I had to learn not to be fearful of losing. And I learned to transform my mental state into a state of performance using visualization and meditation. So when I start thinking about flow state, I think about a co-activated sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic's easy. And I think of warriors. Warriors in that they have a high sympathetic, but for them to do well, they've got to get that parasympathetic activated. I'll tell you another note on this. So our heavyweight, Kyle Snyder, the Olympic gold medalist from 16, in 18, we had a situation where he was wrestling a wrestler from the University of Michigan, which is our arch rival. This wrestler was also a world champion, but he was big. Kyle wrestles 97K in the Olympics. So he walks around our room about 230. The guy he's wrestling, Adam Kuhn, wrestles 125K. He was a world champion at 125K. So he's considerably larger. When we wrestled the dual meet up in Ann Arbor, we measured HRVs that morning. And you can tease out with some statistical process, you can tease out whether it is sympathetic or parasympathetic. What is the signal? Well, his arm SSD was lower than I'd seen it. But when I looked, his sympathetic drive was almost 20 times above where it should have been. Now, so this athlete was fearful. Now, okay, don't ever ask a 19-year-old if he's fearful. It's the wrong question. So we brought him home and I showed him the data. I said, listen, I see this sympathetic bump. I see, parasympathetic. I said, what do we do? I said, we need to boost your parasympathetic. So I gave him one of these inner balance devices from HeartMath. It plugs into his phone. It measures HRV and has visual coaching cues, and it gamifies this meditative process. He went ham on this. He went from level 1 to level 4 the first day. Normally it takes a month for me to get an athlete there. He absolutely, and this is the kind of kid he is. He's the youngest Olympic gold medalist in the history of United States wrestling. He wrestled Adam 2 more times, Big Ten finals, national finals, both of those HRV measurements. I normally look for a number that's less than 1, ideally. So he went from 20 to 2. So, and he did that not by lowering sympathetic, we did it by raising parasympathetic. We were driving flow state. And he happened to win both those matches. So there's another example how this flow state driving parasympathetic can be beneficial when you start to using HRV as a tool.
Okay, great. Okay, I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You did that one podcast on the endocannabinoid system, mm-hmm. and how that facilitates recovery. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so to give our listeners a little bit of a background, I left Ohio State because I was invited to go work in the cannabis industry in the state of Florida here in the States. And that invitation came from, while I was at Ohio State, I had a lot of pro coaches reaching back to me saying, hey, what do you know about cannabis and what's going on with HRV? And my athletes, were in the NCAA, cannabis was banned, but in pros, it was allowed. And they said, you got to look at this. And I started to do some research, and you know what? Cannabis use done correctly can be very beneficial. It done incorrectly, it can be very, it can hurt. So like everything's, but you have part of your nervous system is called the endocannabinoid system. So it's a system that produces homeostasis in your nervous system. When you exercise, you produce a molecule that's called anandamide. This is one of the benefits of exercise. Anandamide is an endocannabinoid, and it lowers anxiety, improves neural communication. There's a lot of benefits that come from this. I've been teaching exercise physiology for 35 years. I had never heard of the endocannabinoid system until I jumped into the deep end of the pot pool in the United States. Now that I understand it, when you look at HRV, we're measuring endocannabinoid system status. We're measuring, do we have high level? Do we have low level? Anandamide in your brain, you have a part of your brain that's called the amygdala, and this is the fear sensing part of your brain. When the bear walks through the door, the amygdala fires up and says, you got to do something. So it's the fear detector. People who are traumatized have lower anandamide levels. Well, let me take that back. Mice that are traumatized have lower anandamide levels in the amygdala than mice that aren't. And it's a natural shift. And I think it's a logical explanation to say trauma, which creates hypervigilance, lowers anandamide. Using exogenous cannabinoids can help balance that. And they don't have to be the consciousness changing cannabinoids. These can be in the and the terpenoids and the CBDs can be very, very beneficial tools in this environment. So that's where that comes back to. So we're pretty confident that cannabis use done correctly raises HRV.
Okay. Brilliant. All right, Don, that's us, I think. Any more questions, guys? You can pop them in the chat quickly. Anybody want to unmute themselves?
Well, as we're waiting, I want to thank you all again for the opportunity. This is certainly a highlight of when Tracy reached out. I thought, wow, this is unique, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. If you have questions or if there's something I can help with, my social media handles are almost all the same. It's at Don Moxley. I typically live in Twitter. That's where most of the information that I work with goes to. Currently, the work that I'm doing focuses around longevity and longevity practices. That's who's making my house payment right now. But I still consult in all these areas. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Don't reach out on Facebook. I just don't like living there. But I am on Instagram. I am on LinkedIn. I am on. If you want to send me an email, you send me an email at donmoxley@gmail.com.
Okay, we got one more question. What apps and instruments are available to measure HRV?
Lots. And my recommendation is, first of all, learn to do it yourself. Learn how you get a feeling for this. Don't make the mistake of saying, hey, I want to do this. I've got a $5,000 grant. I'm gonna go throw all this hardware at my team. It'll fail. Learn how to use it yourself. If you want to dive into this, my recommendation is go buy an Oura ring. It gives you a really good tool for measuring HRV. It gives you a great sleep algorithm that goes with that. It's a very good tool. Then you can make the decision of where you move from there. If you have a heart rate monitor and you just want to play with it, you can go get a free app from a company called Elite HRV. They do a great job. Their podcast, I've been on their podcast 3 or 4 times. I love these guys, and they have their podcasts are very good. That's where I would start. Not all heart rate monitors are good enough to measure HRV. That's the reason I say use the Polar H7 or H10. You have to have a high enough measurement rate for it to be a good measurement. But it's just very difficult. Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, Elite HRV is a great company. And a Polar H5. Listen, I don't know how you train when you start to use a heart. Tracy, do you use a heart rate monitor?
Nobody in my team does.
When you learn how to use it, it is an incredibly valuable tool. An H7 I think is $50, an H10 is $90. I don't know if they'll work in the pool. You got to get. I think Garmin has some pool-based heart rate monitor tools, but understanding heart rate and training load can be just absolutely dramatic in its impact on your training, understanding training. So when you start to get workload and HRV together, so you're starting to deal with external force, you're starting to look at an internal response. They're now very approachable. I realize $300 is a lot of money for some people. I do know most people are walking around in shoes that cost more than what a heart rate monitor costs.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, done. I think that's it. I can't tell you how awesome this has been, connecting again. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
And yeah, I think that we will be looking to you for some more info on things that you have touched on this evening. So thanks very, 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 very much.
You all have a great day. I hope the weather's nice. We've got 3 degrees Fahrenheit here today. Which I don't know what that is centigrade. It's really freaking cold.
It looks like it's snowing.
Yeah, we got a lot of snow on the ground. It's iced up, and I don't think you're dealing with that right now.
No, total opposite. Yeah, good. So you must come and visit us soon. And thanks very much. Thanks very much. And as usual, guys, please remember your CPD follow-up. It is on the website now, so you can go in there and do your confirmation check-ins. And until next time, thanks very much.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Cheers, Don. Bye.